Facilities that make this program possible are provided by the City of Highland Park. Programs are produced independently by members of the community. The City of Highland Park is not affiliated with the following program or the producers of public access programming and is not responsible for the content. The following program does not reflect the opinions of the City of Highland Park.
Hello, welcome to another edition of What's This Show For? FOR, Friends of Ron. I'm your host, Ron Levitsky. Not too long ago, the Los Angeles Times wrote an editorial, "No skill is more crucial to the future of a child or to a democratic and prosperous society than literacy," which I suppose is a fancier way of saying what Frederick Douglass said 100 years earlier: once you learn to read, you will be forever free. Many of us who know how to read take it for granted, but imagine for a moment not being able to read or struggling to read, how horrible that must be. Well, what do you do about it? How does one overcome illiteracy? Fortunately, today we have a person who's an expert in the field and is going to share his thoughts with us on that topic, Dr. Shawn Robinson. Shawn, welcome, and delighted to have you on the show.
Thank you, Ron. I appreciate it.
And just to kind of give the audience a little background, we have a mutual friend, Lou Goldstein,
Yes.
who's a good friend of mine, and he was a mentor to you,
Yes.
and now is a friend when you were at New Trier High School.
Correct.
And he kind of brought us together, and I just thought it was so interesting what you're doing. I had to have you on the show, and again, appreciate you coming on.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Let's start with a little bit about your background.
Okay.
Where were you born? Where did you grow up?
I was born in Chicago, but I grew up in Wilmette. I went to, trying to remember this, Mackenzie, Wilmette Junior High, and then New Trier.
Okay, so you went through the New Trier system, and that's,
Yes.
I mean, the elementary and the high school systems together are probably academically, it's one of the most challenging systems in the world.
Correct.
So how did you handle that?
Well, it was difficult when my mother first moved us from Evanston to Wilmette. I was placed in special education classes my entire career, and so people just labeled me as being angry, and my IEP was just focused on behavioral.
And that's individual educational
plan.
program.
Yep.
Plan. Okay.
And so I think I was going through a lot of issues coming from a single parent household, not having a father figure there too. So I was really uncertain about who I was, my identity.
Now, was this true in Evanston as well, all the way through?
Not so much, because I only went to Evanston up to third grade, and then after that I transferred over to the Wilmette School District.
Okay.
And so I knew at that time still I wasn't able to read, and my mother knew it too. That's why she moved us to the Wilmette School District. Thought that I would get a better education and be taught how to read properly. And so my journey pretty much through elementary school all the way up, I was unable to read. I was frustrated. I was angry.
Now, why do you think you weren't able to read?
I mean, there's a lot of factors. One, maybe teachers didn't know how to identify dyslexia. It's not really discussed in teacher education programs, specifically how to help teachers look for it and also help teachers understand how to work with students with dyslexia. So
And the dyslexia, and you're an expert. I understand that you just got chosen to be on the board of directors for the International Dyslexia Association.
Correct.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Not everybody in the audience knows what dyslexia is.
All right.
So could you explain that, please?
Yeah, it's a neurological, people say like deficit, but I don't like to use the word deficit. And so really it's having a lack of awareness of the sounds in our language, phonemic awareness. Grapheme, phonemes make sounds, letters, and really to understand the concept of how our language is put together, like linguistics. And so I had no idea or any conceptual knowledge of sounds in letters or what words make. And so when I looked at a piece of paper, I would just stare at it, or I would make up a word because I wasn't able to attack that word. I was just really just unfunctional to read.
So it was a neurological issue?
Yeah, well, they say it's neuro, because really in the education field, a lot of people don't like to take what neuroscience says, because there's a lot of debate between education and science. And I teach the science of reading. that's how I was taught to read, was based on the science of reading, which is really grapheme, phoneme representation of how to really understand linguistics and understand the sound structure of how our language is put together.
So you, as a young student,
Yes.
were not identified initially
Yes.
as having this issue, and that's what
Correct.
caused so much frustration.
Yes.
And then when you got into the, was it Wilmette or New Trier system that you were able to be identified and began to make some progress?
No, I wasn't identified at all in the New Trier School District.
Oh, okay.
I wasn't identified until going into my senior year by a professor by the name of Dr. Robert T. Nash, who was a professor at the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh, who started a program for students with learning disabilities. And in fact, I got kicked out of high school and went to alternative high school, so I didn't really have any goals, aspirations. I was just
Okay, but now I know that you're in the Hall of Fame at New Trier.
yes, yes.
So between getting kicked
Oh,
out
yes.
of New Trier
Yeah.
and being on the Hall of Fame, there's got to be a big story in there somewhere.
I just worked hard. When I was at New Trier, I had some great teachers, Mr. Goldstein, Mr. Carpenter, Mr. Taviano, Coach Barfield, teachers, the Broskis. I mean, teachers that really cared about me, and many might not know how to work with my dyslexia, but they cared. They loved me. They poured love into me. And so when that love was poured into me, then I started really believing in myself, not so much academically, but just as a person. Like Special Olympics, Mr. Goldstein. When I got involved with that, I've been coaching since '94. I haven't missed a year. 20 plus years I've been involved with that. So I think it's the teachers that poured that love into me, but I still wasn't able to read.
So we think of reading as strictly something mechanical, but you're saying there's a lot of emotional
Yes,
issues in there
yes.
as well, and
Self-esteem,
attitudinal.
everything. I mean,
Okay.
motivation. I mean, so many factors.
So let's go forward then. So you're kicked out of high school, but then you go to college.
Yes, yes.
So how did that work?
So I went to alternative high school, so I was still able to graduate with my class after I changed my behavior. And so my mom found this professor, because my high school counselor told me I was too slow, too dumb to proceed to college. And so she was like, no, my son's going to college. He could be successful. So we drove up to Oshkosh one day in the blizzard, November, and I'm kicking and screaming, cursing, telling my mom I'm not going to make it, I'm not smart enough. And so she stopped, got the phone, called this professor, and she said, we're going to turn around and go home. It's a blizzard. Sean's, acting really emotional right now, and it's not going to work. And he said, nope. He said, I would not let any snowstorm stop me from getting an education. Mom gets back in the car. She says, we're going. So we drive about 3-4 hours in the snowstorm to Oshkosh. I get there, I'm still kicking and screaming. He calls me to his office, gives me a battery of assessments tests, and he asked me to spell the word cane. I was like, all right, cool, K-A-M. He was like, spell it again? I was like, K-A-M. He was like, you have dyslexia. So then he explained to me what it was. He's like, but I see talent in you. I see potential. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to accept you into my program. It doesn't guarantee that you accept it to university, 2 different applications. So I went home. I was screaming, I'm going to college, Mom, I'm going to college. But I was still too illiterate to still complete my application. So my mother actually filled out my entire application for me for college, my essays, everything, because I was functionally illiterate. I had no idea how to write sentences, spell, and so once she did that, I got accepted into the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh, and my professor taught me how to read. The doors just opened for me.
And so through that professor, you really did a turnaround.
My life
180.
changed completely.
Yeah. And tell us about your educational career post-high school as you went into college and then postgraduate.
So my undergrad was at University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh. It took me 6 years to finish my degree because I had to make up everything I missed in high school, plus my college load. That's a lot psychologically for somebody to go through.
Sure.
Learn how to read, to write, math. I was in remedial classes almost my entire 6 years, plus my college courses. So after I finished, I had a desire to give back. I had a desire to help other kids who were like me. And so then I went on to DePaul University in Chicago to receive my master's in education. Still struggled. I was a horrible writer. My professors would look at my writing and be like, what are you writing? What is this stuff? And so I was like, well, tell me something that doesn't hurt my feelings already, right? Because I couldn't write. So I utilized services, academic support services, anything I can do to better myself, to get a better education. So after 5 years, I finally graduated. So that's 11 years right there. I was in school straight after high school. And I told myself, I want to go even farther. So then I enrolled into a PhD program at Cardinal Stritch University, which is in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and the School of Education with the focus of language and literacy. And I tell you, it just changed my life. Just being able to read. When we talk about slavery of illiteracy, really, I'm not talking about the slave times of, back in historical. I'm talking about myself not knowing my true self and my potential. I was pretty much trapped within myself, screaming for help. And so when I see kids, I work with kids now, I can see myself in them. I can see the frustration in their eyes, and it just becomes a point where I know that they need instruction to learn to read. And once they learn to read, the door's open. I mean, it just.
So you received your PhD.
Yes.
So you're Dr. Robinson.
Yes. No. Yes.
And that's wonderful. And if you were to kind of look back, and I'm sure you have, and think about the reasons for your success, because it just seems so daunting. It would have been so easy to quit any way along. Anytime along that way, what do you attribute your success in really getting through?
Well, I'm spiritual too, so I know a higher power God was really, just in me. Maybe it was my purpose in life to help other people, and then my family and friends. People who really poured love into me. I mean, they just always constantly poured love like a flower. They just nurtured it and just let it grow. And I think even with kids today, if you show them love and you pour love into them, they're eventually going to blossom. It's just a matter of when.
And what about the professor who first took you on?
I can't say enough about the professor. I mean, if it wasn't for him, I probably wouldn't be here right now, sitting here, and I don't know where my life would be. But he taught me how to use a dictionary, and I had no idea how to use a dictionary before. And not just a dictionary of looking up the words and the sentences, but how to phonemically say them by sounds. Because if you look in a dictionary, they have the dark print, and to the right of it, they have the less than dark print. And those less than dark prints are little symbols, sounds that the letters make. Mm-hmm. So he taught me how to match them up with the letters. And so once I started that, it was just an open game. It just.
Well, you have had, since your graduation,
yes.
You've had a lot of professional interest.
Okay.
And let's talk about some of them.
Okay.
And then if I miss something that you think is important, let's come back to it. But I was intrigued, and in fact, I use it as a lead-in, that when we talked and when I read a little bit about you, you used the term breaking the chains.
Yes.
And you make this continual metaphor of illiteracy as slavery.
Yes.
Could you explain a little bit further?
Yes. Well, I think it doesn't matter what your culture or ethnic background is. If you're unable to read, you have limited options. Job applications, you really have a hard time filling them out. There's other things too that stop a person from really reaching their potential. And that's basics: reading, writing, and mathematics. And so the students I work with and myself, I'll start with myself first. When I talk about breaking the chains, is really learning how to read, becoming from illiterate to being literate, like understanding how to read and how words have meaning and how to use the words in different contexts. And so once, I think again, when students really understand their true self by reading, because reading opens up your mind, imagination. I mean, you think about things you never thought about before when you read. And for me, when I first opened the book and I knew how to read, it just took off. And even when I work with students now and adults, when I can see the frustration in their eyes, and the 30, 40, 50-year-old men and women who are reading at a third or fourth grade level, when I teach them just to become independent about how to use a dictionary, and they see success, they just soar, they just take off like eagles, and no longer really needed as much, because before it's like a crutch. They need to hold on to me. But when I teach them the tools to do it independently, the world's theirs. They just take off. So that's what I say about breaking the chains, is really understanding our language structure and tools to become better readers.
Okay, and we'll go into a little more detail on how you do that in a moment, but let's look at some of the groups. You mentioned both adults and young people.
Yes.
So I take it you teach then adults, you teach young people.
Yes.
Is there a significant difference in the way you approach an adult versus, say, a young person or a teenager?
No. When I did the summer program this summer, I had a middle school, high school combination, and then adult class, and I approach it the same way that I approach everything else. And I teach them at high standards. I teach the same type of method, and it just works. It's the same method that my professor taught me, And I was in groups with people a lot older than me and some that are a little younger than me. So I don't really have a different style for it. Unless they're like elementary school kids.
Yeah.
But middle, 7th, 8th grade and up, it's pretty much the same.
Do you think that younger people are helped by having older people in the class as role models?
Oh, yes, yes. And even for this class, what I did was I really believe in constructive learning. So what I did was I found some peers, students that caught on quick. I matched them with the peers who were maybe just a little bit behind. And then when they worked together, they just took off. They just soared. Because again, a peer interaction. You know, they lived it. They've seen it before. They understand. So, and they build community, and that's the part of learning too, is building community.
I imagine a lot of these young people haven't had much success in school, and so the very fact that they're succeeding must just be emotionally marvelous for them.
As you said, the key word, success. You just have to give kids hope and teach them how to be successful. Because once they learn, they're already successful. Kids have the potential to be successful. They're just finding the right tools to provide them so they can be successful. And once they do it, it's just like a rocket. They just take off.
Okay. I noticed also in reviewing a lot of the many articles you've worked on that you seem to have a focus. It's not the only focus, but you seem to have a focus on working with African American males.
Yes.
And are there some particular issues in working with African American males versus other groups? Why did you focus on them?
My own life, my own lived experiences. Like when I talk about dyslexia, I talk about dyslexia for everybody. I don't care what nationality you are. And then when I talk about black males with dyslexia, I'm talking about other factors, systematic factors that really can keep some oppressed. And for me, when I talk about my experience, I grew up in North Shore, great education system, but it was still forms of oppression. I dealt with racist biases, teachers and kids, calling me the N-word. I dealt with difficult situations in the community. I dealt with labels of being an angry black man to self-contained classes. And if you look at the data statistically, that's majority of African American males are housed in special education, and then it just becomes a prisoner pipeline. Most just start there, and then they end up in prison or jail.
Do you find it, at least initially, more challenging teaching African American males versus, say, females or other groups?
No.
No?
I just, for me, it's just anybody who wants to learn to read, I'm going to teach them. But then I can also take another hat off and say, you know what, I lived the experience of an African American male in special education who was illiterate, who has now worked out of that to earn a PhD. Like I've had a lot of professors, even after high school, that told me, you will never be successful. Stop now. You'll never be successful. The work you're doing is not going to benefit anybody. Why are you focusing on this? Why are you focused on African Americans? And I always just kept my head down, and I knew in my heart what I wanted to do, and I just followed my heart. And I tell students, you just got to follow your heart, and just keep moving forward.
Okay. And you also mentioned a term which, as a teacher, I had heard, but I don't think it's commonly known, the idea of working with kids who are twice exceptional.
Yes.
Can you explain what that term means?
Yep. So my disability masked my gift because I was frustrated, from not knowing how to read. And so my gift inside was always giving or leadership. And I didn't know that at that time because I was angry. It's like a bulldog, right? And so students who are twice exceptional, who have a learning disability, also are gifted. But a lot of times their learning disability masks their giftedness. It can be gifted in a lot of stuff, mathematics, visual arts, sports, leadership. There's so many different areas that students can be successful at. But sometimes their frustration of not knowing how to do academic tasks masks.
Are you able to use the gifts that a student has to, as a kind of an incentive to work better at the reading?
For myself, since I've lived it before, for me, it's just natural to see students. First of all, I tell every student in my class before they start, you're all gifted. You're all talented. Now it's just a matter of trying to put the pieces to the puzzle together for you to understand your true potential. And once that happens, it's a done deal.
Wow, wow. Well, let's take your method, which I think you told me you learned from your professor.
Right.
You're director of Pure and Complete Phonics.
Yes.
So let's say that I'm an adult and I can't read.
Okay.
And I come to you and say, you know, help me. What are some things that you would do?
Well, the first thing was always I teach them how to use the dictionary independently. Because you'd be surprised, again, how many people are not aware of how to use a dictionary correctly. And the second thing is, if I could show you on that piece of paper, if that's okay.
Sure.
Flip it over. So, for example.
We're going to show the audience in a moment, okay.
So, I'll write this word. Have you heard that word before?
I don't think so. I'll hold it up. I don't know if you're going to be able to see it because of the glare. But the letters are W-Y-S-I-W-Y-G.
So that's one of the words that I would show, and then I'll show you how phonetically how I break it down so students can pronounce it correctly.
And then what would it be? I'm sure.
WYSIWYG.
WYSIWYG?
Yes, WYSIWYG.
WYSIWYG.
So
okay.
I'll show you real quick. So the W-Y make the W sound.
Uh-huh.
That's a W-I with the short mark.
All right.
The S makes what sound? WIZ.
Okay, Z.
Yep. WIZ-E.
E.
And if you know this part, you know this part name. It's the same thing.
Okay. All right, so here, so you're breaking it down for students to be able to understand
by sounds.
it.
So the first one is WIZ-WIG. How many syllables is that?
3.
So students can visually see it, kinesthetically can write it, and they can hear it. So using all 3 senses to really manifest your growth. And then to even go even farther, what I'll do too is, if we have time, I can show you.
Well, I don't know if we'll have the time to go through everything because I want to talk about
All
a few
right,
other
that's
things.
fine.
But so, okay, so then I start out, and is this something that's done in a small, large group, or is it all done individually?
No, I do it both individually and group, but I believe in the power of group learning. I think it's more beneficial for students to learn in groups.
Okay, and I noticed that there was a DVD tape or videotape of you teaching.
Yes.
And I think you said that sometimes the kids call you a drill sergeant.
Yes.
And what did you mean by that?
Well, it's because, you know, if you don't get it right the first time, we're going to keep doing it until you get it right. And not in like a punishment way, but in a loving way. I want you to be successful. So there's no room for errors. So anytime that you might not understand or get it incorrect, we're just going to keep doing it. And that's what Dr. Nash did to me. He was kind of an old school drill sergeant type education person that was just, you know, just we're going to get it until you get it.
And normally, how many sessions or how many weeks, how many months is one of your programs with the students?
It varies. Like the one I did in the summer, it was 10 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
It was 3 days a week for an hour and 15 minutes.
Okay.
And so the students that finished and the adults finished it gained between 1.5 years and 4 years in reading.
Really?
They jumped, yes. Yes.
So that's pretty significant.
Yes, yes.
And then do you get follow-up so that, all right, here's a student who gained a year and a half, whatever, which is really impressive in 10 weeks. Do you ever get feedback from them later saying, I built upon this, or I'm learning, my learning's accelerated, I'm gaining even more?
Yes, students, parents will email me and say, you know, Dr. Robinson, thank you so much for helping my son or daughter this summer. I've seen a tremendous growth. In their confidence, they are tackling reading now. They enjoy reading. Before they couldn't stand opening the book. So yes, I do get some testimonials from parents and students themselves.
Now, you mentioned to me earlier before the show that you're having a book published.
Yes.
And it's called Untold Narratives.
Yes.
And it deals with, according to your blurb, African American students receiving special education services and succeeding beyond expectations.
Yes.
So can you tell us a little bit about the book?
Yeah, so the book, it was basically came through me, through prayer, and basically was based on my research. And so I figured when I was looking at research, a lot of the voices were left out, people who have lived the similar experiences I had. And so basically I just put a call out for individuals who would want to share their story like mine. So I have 6 stories in the book by men and women. The men share commonalities, learning disabilities and behavioral. We're in special ed, same kind of track record, now successful. One's a pastor, one's getting his PhD, and one's an author for children's book. The women, one's legally blind, one is deaf, and one has learning disability. So they're talking about how they've navigated a system that had tried to oppress them, and they came out and now are successful.
Yeah, you've used the term a couple of times I saw on the tape,
Yes.
the system, that
Yes.
the system's not serving minorities well.
Yeah.
So if you were in charge of, let's say, the Department of Education, what changes would you institute, do you think, to improve the system?
Well, I think it's just not minority students. Like I know there's an issue, K through 12, students with learning disability. If you're white, you're black, and there's a lot of resistance between, again, what teachers say and what the science of reading says. And so right now, I did working with a lot of parents, Caucasian parents who are fighting a system because their kids, some of their daughters, are not getting the service they need. And these are parents that have capital. Imagine if you don't have capital. Diagnostic assessments cost $3,000 to $5,000 to get assessed. So for me, when I talk to school districts, it's about building relationships, capacity. You got to take chances. You know, you got to really understand who the students are, and you also have to teach the teachers how to work with these students. And if you don't have a good relationship, it's not gonna happen. Like Mr. Goldstein, for example, I use him. He had students that the system just kind of gave up on. He was like, no, I can teach these kids how to be successful. And what did he do? He taught success. And so when he taught success, this program started to just blossom. And he taught students what they needed.
I remember he used to say, you know, to a student, don't tell me what you can't do, tell me what you can do.
That's it.
And he would always build on that.
There's so many times you hear kids and parents saying that their son or daughter was told what they can't do. You can't do this. You can't. So if you hear it enough times, you kind of start speaking and living it. So I always tell people first, always believe in the student. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, it sure did.
Okay,
It sure
wanted to
did.
make sure.
And then you have an acronym of your program, HOPE,
Yes.
H-O-P-E, which is helping,
Yes.
opportunity,
Yeah.
progress,
Yeah.
and empower.
Yes.
And by empower,
Just confidence, self-esteem, being independent, and just soaring. You know, I got to tell every kid has a gift. It's just trying to foster that gift so they can believe in themselves, love themselves, and be successful, and then give back.
and if people want to contact you, they can look you up online?
Yeah, my email is just Dr. Shawn Anthony Robinson at Gmail.
Dr. Shawn Anthony
It's my
Robinson
full government name.
at gmail.com. Well, Shawn Robinson, Dr. Shawn Robinson, Director of Pure and Complete Phonics. Really appreciated you being on the show. What do you like to read? You know, for pleasure.
A lot of research books still. I have a tendency just to still read about just things about dyslexia, and that's pretty much what I read. I write a lot too. Just read and write, that's pretty much what I do.
I was really impressed by just the number of, at your age, the number of articles that you've already published. Really, really, really impressive. And it sounds like you're just going to continue in that trajectory, which is wonderful.
I'm gonna take a break.
Well, well, you absolutely deserve it. And again, it was a pleasure to have you on the show. I hope that you've enjoyed this as well and really learned a lot about the concept of kind of appreciating what we have, which is the ability to read, but also understanding that when people can't read, it's not always their fault. It may be certain conditions that made it a certain way, and yet people like Shawn Robinson can really make a difference in the people's lives, young and old, male and female. So again, I hope you learned as much about reading difficulties, but also overcoming challenges as I did. So Shawn, thanks again, and look forward to seeing you next time on What's This Show For, FOR, Friends of Ron. See you next time.